is it just comes good by rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, putting it away for 3 months, coming back to it with a clear eye and thinking, I couldn't have written that. That is awful. How didn't I see this, and this that was wrong with that? And, the process of writing a very short book can literally take 2 years.
This is the Parenting in Perspective podcast. It's a Happy Families podcast. My name is Dr. Justin Coulson, and I've got to admit, I was so excited when Mem Fox agreed to be a guest on the Parenting in Perspective podcast because as a writer myself, it's not every day that you get to chat with one of Australia's most loved and respected authors. Mem Fox grew up on a mission field in Rhodesia, now known as Zimbabwe, before she moved to London in the mid-1960s so that she could study drama. And it was those formative years in Africa where she saw firsthand the racial segregation that divided the nations. And so this set Mem on a lifelong course to promote tolerance and unity through her writing and her speaking and her teaching. Well, Mem Fox is well known as a prolific writer of children's books. Her classic picture book, Possum Magic, which was first published in 1983, has become one of Australia's all-time bestsellers. I think we have a couple of versions of it on our shelves at home. And since then, Mem has written around about 40 books, in fact more than 40 books for children, as well as a number of titles for adults. Mem is also well known as an educator. She's worked as an associate professor in literacy studies at Flinders University, and her passion for literacy has seen her travel the world, urging parents and teachers to read aloud to children, especially during those early years up to the age of 5 and even beyond. So it was an absolute honour and pleasure to spend some time talking with Mem Fox about her life and her parenting journey. And as always, I began by asking about the Mem Fox family.
The Mem Fox family is absolutely minute. It's minute. I have one husband of 51 years. I have one daughter who's not much younger than that. And I have one grandson, and the grandson is 10. And as I say to people, he's the heaven that we live in.
That's it. It's just very, very small. And for somebody like me with 6 daughters, I can't imagine how quiet your home must have been.
I can't, the reverse is the situation. Every time you mention, and you used to mention it in your columns as well, I knew you had 6 daughters. And I would always think about the laundry, and I would think about, kids going to ballet or soccer or whatever, how you organize the logistics of getting kids to school in one car on time. I mean, unbelievable. Unbelievable. I once said to my daughter, because I had 2 careers running at the same time. I was a university lecturer full-time, and I was writer full-time for 14 years. And I once said to her, I think she was about 14, I said, sweetie, if I'd had a second child, I would have killed it. And she said, if you hadn't, I would have.
I would have. Oh, beautiful.
All families are different. And that's why the world is so interesting, because the variety of family produces the variety of character, produces the variety of politician, musician, football player, you name it. It's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
So tell me about your growing up, Mem. From what I read, you grew up in Africa. You spent your school years, your childhood in Africa.
My parents were missionaries. I grew up on a mission, very close to a big city. So it wasn't the wilds of Africa or anything, And the school I went to was an all-white, all-girls high school.
Now, before you tell me about that all-white, all-girls school, my understanding is that when you first got to Rhodesia, or Zimbabwe as we would call it today, that you actually went to a school that was all black. You were the only white child in the school.
I did, because I was on the mission and there was a mission school. I mean, my dad was there as a teacher trainer. That was his job, was to direct the teachers' college on the mission. And so, of course, there was a school on the mission. Well, why not go out of your front door straight into the school? Why get into a car and go to another school? It's ridiculous. So my parents I think they knew, Justin, I think they knew it was against the law. But they let me go to the school on the mission, which was totally African. And that was against the law at the time. That was against the law. The schools were completely segregated.
And so what was that experience when you're the only white child in an all-African school?
It wasn't an experience. It wasn't an experience because kids don't notice. There was no difference between them and me. That's the wonderful thing about kids.
Yeah.
There was no difference. The difference happened when I was taken out of that school and I had to go to an all-white school, and I had been barefoot for a lot of my life, I suppose, except in deep winter. I'd been barefoot. I had to wear shoes to school every day, and I also spoke English with an African English accent, okay? So that would have been the accent of people's servants, right? That was the accent that I spoke English with. And I was mocked and bullied and laughed at, friendless. Oh, I've almost got tears in my eyes thinking about it. It was terrible. I remember sitting in the school toilets at the age of 6, just crying my eyes out.
So this was right at the very beginning of your schooling. You were
yes, it was. It was my second year of schooling.
Right. So did you manage to get you got an entire year in your original school?
I did. Yeah, I did. Which was a damn good start because the teaching was excellent. And it was very strict. It was very rote learning. It was crowded. There were some brilliant teachers, but also, some quite firm teaching. It was fine. I thrived. I loved it.
So how long were you in Africa? How long were you in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe?
I was born in Melbourne. I went there in 1946, and I was 6 months old. And then I left to go to drama school in London at the age of 19.
Oh, wow. So you spent your entire childhood?
My entire childhood. My entire childhood was in Rhodesia, yeah.
So tremendously racist attitudes pervaded during that time, escalating to violence and murder. And I'd imagine that you must have seen and witnessed some extraordinary things. When you consider that upbringing, what impact do you think that had on you as a writer and as a parent and as an educator?
As a writer, I know that one of the things that I've learned from children is that they are not as racist as adults. On the whole, they're not as racist as adults. Give them a chance and they're not racist. But I know that their parents need re-educating. It's not so much the children who need re-educating, it's the parents who need re-educating. So there are several of my books, in particular a book called Whoever You Are and another one called 10 Little Fingers and 10 Little Toes. And both of those books are deeply anti-racist, deeply. But nobody would pick it up and say, oh, this is a deeply anti-racist book. Because if you did pick up a book that was, oh, this is a deeply anti-racist book, you wouldn't want to read it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can't bash kids. Kids loathe being taught a lesson in a book that's supposed to entertain them. As soon as an adult tries to tell them to save the whale or save the planet or whatever, that's for non-fiction. That's not for fiction. They loathe being told a lesson in fiction.
Well, it feels controlling, doesn't it? It feels like...
It is, yeah.
Yeah. I've spent many, many nights laying on the bed beside any of my 6 daughters reading I Have 10 Little Fingers and 10 Little Toes. I've read that so many times. I don't know how many of your books we have on our shelves, but we have a few. And a recent book of yours, I'm Australian Too.
Yes.
You said, and I quote, that you wrote it in the hopes that it will spark spirited discussions about Australianness, create an awareness of Australian immigration over the centuries, and begin to calm the rising racism in Australia. So do you feel like racism is on the rise in Australia?
I do, I think. I think I do, and I think it's a matter of leadership. I think our leaders of Australia at the moment, I think, are so racist and so cold-hearted, so lacking in empathy, so unable to see that people of a different race and a different religion have the same hopes, the same love, the same sense of humor, the same need for food and comfort and hugs and care. It's a failure of leadership. And I think our racism goes in waves. We're more racist than at other times. And our treatment of refugees and so on it's just sickening. When you've grown up, as I did, in a multicultural society where you're in the minority, you are actually in the minority, you do realize everybody's the same. I mean, everybody is the same. Some people are bastards. It doesn't matter what color they are and what religion they are. They're bastards. And some people are just the warmest, most beautiful people you could imagine. Color, it's just literally skin deep.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, reflecting on the experience that you had. You're in an all-black school and having the time of your life as a 5-year-old. Then as a 6-year-old, you go to an all-girls, all-white school and find yourself sobbing in the toilets because you can't fit in. Now you're different. You're still in the minority because your accent's just a little bit off, or because you've come from the mission rather than from the fancy suburb down the street.
Sure.
When you write your books, do you ever think to yourself, how can I teach this lesson? I mean, is that where these books have come from? Are you thinking, I want parents to get this and I want children to get this? Is this your way of, I guess, preaching this message of solidarity and unity and inclusiveness?
I don't know that, I can't really answer that question. It's interesting because the books come from my heart. They don't really come from my brain. Now, if they were coming from my brain, I would probably say, yes, I want to get this lesson out. But it's because of my love of humanity, I just want warmth in the world. I just want kindness.
Yeah.
It's not an overt thing. I mean, 10 little fingers and 10 little toes was written on a plane.
Right.
Okay, and I thought I had been weeping and thought that I was never going to write again. And I had been to a conference in the States. I was on my way home. In the States, the people who had come to one session at the conference had been parents, and they had babies of all colors in their arms because they were all colors themselves and all religions. And as if they came with babies, of course, they leaned over the desk that I was signing at. And their babies were very close to me. And, you can't resist putting your finger into the fist of a little, balled up fist.
They grab hold of your finger and
they grab hold of it.
Yeah, you feel so connected.
Your heart just melts. And in my subconscious, and I had taken a sleeping pill because the only time I do, I just knock myself out on long flights. And I was off with the fairies, Justin. I was really away. And this picture of these constant children coming to me with their little fingers, and so it was written out of sweetness. It wasn't written out of trying to teach a lesson. It was, how cute was that?
It's beautiful. I'm curious, you mentioned something and I'd like to just pick up on that. You said you were almost in tears because you were thinking you would never write again. How does Mem Fox, the author of however many bestsellers, 24 best-selling children's books, find herself at a point where she's crying because she thinks, I'm not going to write again. I won't write another children's book. Would you be comfortable sharing why you might have felt like that?
God, yes. Every time I write a book, I think to myself, I have lost it. Oh, my God, I've lost it.
You have imposter syndrome?
Probably, because every time I start, I write rubbish, but you can't improve on the blank page. You have to write something in order to be able to improve on it. You've got to have something on the page. So I write and I write and I write, and it's rubbish, and I'm embarrassed for myself, and I think you couldn't have written this. Your name's Mem Fox. You've got all these books behind you. This could not be you. It could not be you. And it is me. It's absolutely me. And it just comes good by rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, putting it away for 3 months, coming back to it with a clear eye and thinking, I couldn't have written that. I could not have written that. That is awful. How didn't I see this, and this that was wrong with that? And then rewrite that and then put it away. And, the process of writing a very short book can literally take 2 years. I mean, it can take 2 years. And you end up with 260 words. And my daughter, at one of her many careers, was a journalist. And she used to say to me, Ma, what are you doing? Tell me what you're actually doing. I don't understand what you're doing.
Because journalists churn out article after article every day. A couple of thousand words a day.
Every day, pound, and out it comes. She just couldn't get it. I still think she doesn't get it. I think most people don't get it, to tell you honest. It's just, it's hard. It's really hard. It's about rhythm.
Yeah, but it's also about, I think there's a couple of important principles to pull out of there for parents in terms of their own raising of children and also the things that they teach their children. When I reflect back on the way I used to raise my children, I was doing the best that I could at the time. And I thought I thought it was okay at the time. But when I look back at what I was doing, I think to myself, oh my goodness, I can't believe that I would do that or say that or respond like that to one of my children. And in the same way, you're looking at these words on the page and they're the best that you had at the time. But 3 months later, when you've taken a breather and had a look, you're like, oh my goodness, what was I thinking?
What was I thinking?
But there's a couple of important things here. The first is that you've actually stopped, had a think, given yourself a break, and then turned around and taken the time to introspect and to analyze and to I guess go inside yourself and have a look at what you've done and find ways to improve. I mean, that's a critical process, but too often I think a lot of people just sort of coast along and don't necessarily do that deep inner work, that deep introspection that allows them to reflect and change and learn, to have that fresh view. So I think that's tremendously important, but it's also something we need to teach our children, that they will keep on getting better if they just have a go, put it away, come back to it tomorrow or next week or next month. Such an important lesson in resilience.
Yeah, it is.
I'd love to change tack for just a little while, Mem, and head in a different direction. Let's start with Possum Magic. Possum Magic is probably the book that most people know you best for. It's the book that has probably sold more copies than any of your others. I think 5 million copies of Possum Magic.
Yeah. I mean, it's 36 years old, I think, or something. So it must be, it was 83, it's 37 years old, Justin. So, 5 million copies in 37 years. Not exactly, I mean, it's lovely, don't get me wrong, I'm thrilled and I'm proud. But it's not 15 million, it's not 5 million overnight.
So you've sold around 5 million copies of it. However, this is kind of like that great J.K. Rowling story about Harry Potter. You rejected time and time and time again over, what was it, like a 5-year period?
Yes. 9 rejections over 5 years, yeah.
Right, and now it's the best-selling children's book that Australia's ever seen. We've talked a bit about racism, but we've also been talking quite a lot about resilience. What was it that made you keep on going? Why did you believe in Possum Magic, and how did you keep going and keep pushing it? You'd never had any previous success with writing and publications, but what made you say, this book, there's something about it, I've got to try again, and I've got to try again, and I've got to try again?
I put it down to one thing, and it's called a husband. It's a husband who totally believes that you are the most talented thing that, has ever entered the world of children's writing, and that the lack of recognition is an appalling thing that's happening in the world, and one must try again because somebody eventually, surely, will realize that my wife has a talent. I mean, it was like every time a rejection letter came and I'd be devastated, and humiliated. And even though people always write nice rejection letters, but, they're not rude. And you think, oh, no. And you put it away and you don't do anything for a year. And then you send it out again and you tweak it a bit, make it a little bit different from the one that you sent out before. But really it was his, go on, Or I've been in a bookshop today and I have read so many bad books, that have been published for children. Yours is 10 times better than this. You need to send it out. And so, and so it happened. In the end, it happened. By myself, I don't think I would have had the belief. I would have been knocked back so many times. I would have said to myself, probably, listen, come on. 8 people have said, no, you're not really going to try again, are you?
Yeah, and this is what great parents do for their kids as well, right? They don't actually. I mean, your husband didn't do it for you. You had to write the book.
No, not at all.
You had to send the manuscripts off and cop the rejection letters. But I like to think of parents and spouses as hope builders. And what I'm hearing in your husband is a hope builder. He said, "You can do this. I believe in you. You've got this. Let's try again." Yes. He builds you up.
I love that term. A hope builder. It's a beautiful term. I love it. Fantastic.
Yeah. So I love the story though of his support, and not just his support, but your willingness to be in partnership with him to the point where you'll accept his influence and say, all right, I'll try again just to please you, just because I love you, just because you believe in me. Because as he believes in you, you begin to believe in yourself enough to pluck up the courage to face rejection one more time.
Exactly. And the funny thing is that now, if, there's a bad review of a book, which is not, it's not often that it happens, or somebody makes a rude remark about me and, some forum or other, we're not on social media at all, not on any social media. But, if a rude remark comes my way, the person who is most deeply disturbed, hurt, distressed, worried, anxious, humiliated, devastated is my husband.
I can imagine him stomping his feet in the kitchen and saying, how could they say that? What's their address? I'm going to get a baseball bat and teach their letterbox a lesson. And I just let it roll over you. It's fine. It doesn't matter. It's okay. It's all right. It's nothing. But he really takes it to heart because I'm being criticized. He can't stand it. Well, anyway, so. The title of your autobiography in the USA edition is Dear Mem Fox. I have read all your books, even the pathetic ones. So clearly you're not immune from criticism. This was a quote from a child's letter. I love the pluck of this kid. Dear Mem Fox, I've read all your books, even the pathetic ones. Let's
to give him some slack. I had been in his school and I had made a joke against myself because I had, by then, I don't know, I'd written 25 books and some of them were pathetic, right?
So it was your word. He was just giving your word back to you.
I said, some of my books are pathetic, kids. I said, some of them are really fantastic and you know those ones. I said, but I hope you don't know the pathetic ones. I said, because I've published some pathetic ones. So it was, but I loved the letter so much. I just thought, no, that has to be the title. It's fantastic.
It is. I really love it.
Fantastic.
So you spend most of your time now. I mean, you worked in university. You went back to university, trained, did a whole lot of literacy, learning how to teach children how to read and write. If I'm a parent and I want to give my children the best head start, well, not even a head start. I mean, we're in too much of a rush, aren't we, to teach our children to read and write?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think is the right time for our kids to start this, other than the obvious answer, which is when they start providing some level of interest? There are schools particularly in Western Australia and in Tasmania, where they're pushing that age of first reading and first writing down and down and down and down. What do you think is around about the right age? And what advice do you give to parents when it comes to helping their children fall in love with reading?
I think the right age depends on the child. I don't think there's a blanket right age. It depends on where the child is in its interest and its love of books and so on. I mean, if you have a child of 5 who's never seen a book and who has never had an adult conversation that hasn't been an order, like, eat that food and tidy your room or wear your socks and
go to bed.
If they go to bed, if they haven't had lots and lots of conversation, if they haven't had a lot of awareness of how fantastic books can be and how funny and how nice it is to be with mum or dad or grandma or whoever, reading a book, it's just, the bonding that happens then, it's just so nice. If they haven't had any of that experience and they come to school and they're taught in a way that's quite, fairly boring, that's not the way that, lots of kids learn to read when they learn to read most happily, well, of course they fail, and then they fail again, and then they fail again, and then they fail in life. And it's just heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking. So I would say a kid is ready to learn to read when they're ready to learn to read. I mean, there was a genius child a couple of doors away from where I live who was reading at 3, and she could sight read at 3. Well, I mean, that's incredibly unusual, but she wasn't pushed. It just happened. She was read to absolutely endlessly. And when I wrote Reading Magic, long after my own daughter, of course, had learned to read just, by chance, I thought to myself, this grandchild had been very, very premature, 30 weeks. And I thought this learning to love books and learning to read almost by accident and it just sort of clicks with school starting. That's not going to work with him because his brain's going to be so affected by his early birth. And it was the same. It was the same with him as it was with the normal child that, was in my life. It was exactly the same. He learned to read when he was ready to learn to read, which was, around 4.5, 5, 6. Suddenly, we couldn't even work out how it happened. I mean, it just was there.
So if I was to summarise, and I think what you're saying is fairly well aligned with the kinds of things that I say to parents as well, there's all sorts of systems out there for teaching children to read and getting them ahead and getting them started early. And then, of course, we've got other countries that start, at about 6 or 7, like the Swedish and Finnish countries. But it seems that you and I share a lot of agreement here that if a child is indicating a real interest in being a part of a book, being part of a story, understanding what those symbols are on the page, that's the time where we start to engage with them, but let them read almost, not that reading is a quote-unquote natural thing, but because it's something that we've created, but it is something that they can naturally fall into at the right age for them.
Exactly. At the right age for them.
So how do you teach a child to love reading? What's the advice you give to parents so that their children will love reading? Because reading and a love of reading is linked with so many positive outcomes in life, right? We learn about.
Absolutely. The first 5 years of life, is the first 5 years of literacy teaching. And I'm talking the day after kids are born. I do give people a day off. I think that's fair enough on the mother.
Very good of you.
And as I say, well, the dad is around. He's around. It's pretty tough if he's already got 5 children, but, there you go. So, because people say, oh, I've got a son and he doesn't like books, because they say it's because he's a boy. And I say, but if you start when the child is born and the child associates being with you and the love and the smell of you and the feel of you, and the sound of you, and the sight of you, and the safety of you, if they're associating all of that with books, then there's the book and the adult almost become the one happiness. It's just exquisite. They love books because they love you, and they love you because they love books, and you love them because they love the books that you read, and it's just the purest heaven. It's the purest heaven. I mean, my grandson lives 2 streets away from us. And we see a lot of them every day, or every single day we see him. And last night, I had not seen him a lot for 2 days. And he FaceTimed. I mean, this is like, 2 streets away. And he FaceTimed and he said, Nanu, I haven't really seen you properly for 2 days. I haven't really seen you. And I said, I know. I said, I didn't like it. I said, I missed you a lot. And he said, well, can you come over? This is like 8:10 at night. And I said, oh, okay, all right. I said, it's Monday night, and Monday night's, decent television, but there you go, I'll come. I said, I'll come. I said, how about I bring Peter Pan with me? Oh, Nellie, that would be excellent. Now, this kid is an avid reader of nonfiction, avid. He'll read adult bird books. He'll read adult books about the filming of Star Wars. He'll read, fantastically complicated books about dinosaurs that are written for university students. He'll read all of that, but he won't read. He's not a novel reader, which is his choice. That's fine. But he loves hearing novels. He loves it. And because our daughter was so good at reading, when I gave her Peter Pan at 7, she read it herself. So I haven't read Peter Pan since I was a child, which is like 70 years ago, since I've been a new reader. And I was there last night, and it is actually beyond description, the feeling between that child and me last night when I was reading that book to him. And Peter Pan was the vehicle of our love. It was overpowering. It was overwhelmingly divine. When I came back and told my husband, I said, I didn't want to go, and I was sort of a bit tired and sort of flat. And you come back just soaring because the love that surrounds this action of reading to a child, even at 10.
I'm sitting here just grinning into the microphone listening to you tell that story. My smile is as big as it gets because I can relate so much to that. There's a handful of favourites that we've got in our home, and one of them is The Princess Bride by William Goldman. And you're probably familiar with the film that was based on the novel.
Yes.
And I just love reading a story. It's a big story, but I love reading that to my 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds and hearing the emotion as one bad thing after another happens to the character and as one challenge is overcome only for a worse one to arise, and to hear the children go, no, but also just that delight of laying on the bed with them in your arms and something like Sam McBratney, Guess How Much I Love You.
Yes.
And you lay there and you talk about little nut brown hair and I love you to the moon and back, and you kind of just sob with your kids while you're reading these books and thinking about you. And the kids are like, I remember one time that one of my favourite books is a little book called Fanny's Dream. I don't know if you've heard of it or not.
No.
Fanny's Dream is about a lady, I can't remember her name. She's a teenager and there's a ball happening at the mayor's house and she's outside waiting for the fairy godmother to show up, but she never shows up. Instead, Heber walks up and says, Fanny, I'm looking for a wife. And she says, okay, let's do it. And so they get married and they raise the family, and it's a little bit about their trials, and the house burns down and one of the twins does this and that. And then after they've been married for, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 years, Fanny's outside on the farm picking some vegetables last minute before dinner, and the fairy godmother shows up and says, sorry, I'm late. And Fanny's got to make this decision where she has to say to the fairy godmother, I don't want the dream anymore. I'm actually living it. I'm living something better than I could have had. And I'm laying there in the bed and I'm reading to my kids and I've got tears pouring out of my eyes, and it's just so beautiful and meaningful. And my child, I think at the time she was probably 5 years old, she looks at me and she says, Daddy, why are you crying? Like, completely missed all the meaning of the book, completely missed the emotion, completely missed the connection of everything. Just, Daddy, why are you crying? But isn't it, there's just something magical about those moments where we're completely immersed.
Just gorgeous. In a classroom, when kids are crawling up the walls in a classroom and something's happened, say in the playground, or they've got into trouble before recess and they've come back after recess, and there's a disturbance, it's just not right, things aren't feeling right in the classroom. When the adult in the room, whoever it is, starts reading something soothing and warm and rhythmic and familiar, the balloon all the air just comes out of the balloon, and there's serenity and solace and peace and regeneration and forgiveness. It works in the classroom as well as working in the home.
Well, I hope everybody who's listened to this conversation is recommitted to reading to their children this afternoon or tonight or the very next opportunity. If I was to sum up the tips that I normally give people when it comes to reading, I'd love you to fill in any blanks, because you've studied this probably much deeper than me, but just because we're so short on time now, I'm going to go through a quick list of a handful of things that I think are important. You tell me what I've missed or make any elaborations that you think should be there. Number one, I recommend that we read to our children and that we read much more slowly than we want to. And the reason for that is our children can't keep up. Sometimes they miss the nuance. It's just important to read slowly to them. Don't try to get through it. And don't do what my parents used to do and skip a couple of pages to get to the end faster because you're tired and you're going to fall asleep on their bed. The second thing that I would say is, to the extent possible, have them on your lap or have them as close to you so that there's a physical connection. And then the other thing that I would say is make sure that they're involved in some way. They've got some sense of autonomy in terms of what we're reading. Beyond that, and get them to... That's
important. I just want to stop you there. That's very important about the autonomy, because sometimes the book the child likes is not something that the parent likes. But if the child wants it over and over and over and over again, it wants it for a reason. And we just have to swallow our dislike of that book, or you just think, I can't read this book again. You just have to squash that down and just give the child the book again and again and again and again. Because the familiarity with the book, the familiarity with the language is what's going to help the child read the book.
Yeah, no, Nick, can you actually expand on that a little bit more as well and tell me why is it that children want to hear the same story again and again and again? I mean, it drives parents crazy.
I think because children love to be safe. And if they hear the same thing over and over, and it never changes, it's safe. You hear the same thing, the beginning is the same, the middle is the same, the ending is the same. It's the same. I am safe. This has stayed the same. I am in a safe place. It must be a deep psychological thing. I don't understand it. What I don't understand is where is the green sheep, which is a bigger seller now really than Possum Magic.
Yep.
It's in much, it's taken to people's hearts even more in a different way. But, the last line, you go through the whole book, where is the green sheep? 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 And you get to the end and it says, here's our green sheep fast asleep. Kids know after the first reading where the green sheep is, but they still want the book over and over and over again, and they still get sort of agitated with excitement as the pages turn, and they know they're going to get to the end where they find the green sheep. And I think it's just predictability, that their predictions ring true and they're safe.
Yeah, my kids love Where is the Green Sheep as well. We've read that until it's threadbare. The last point that I was going to make, and I'm sure that there are many others that you could add, is that our children need to see us reading. They need to see us loving being immersed in our books as well.
I don't know how you do it with 6 kids. I do not know how you find time to see your kids to see you reading. I don't know how you do it. I know that once when I was reading The Colour Purple by Alice Walker, I think our daughter was 13, and I didn't make lunch. It was a Saturday. I didn't have anything to do with lunch, and dinner was late because I said, I'm just sorry. I cannot, sorry, but I've just got to read a couple more chapters. I don't know whether it was The Colour Purple, but man, she definitely knew that I liked reading. It's true, I think I was being to read, and I certainly saw my parents reading. I certainly saw them reading. But it's a tough thing to ask these days that parents are seen to be reading.
Yeah, put those phones down.
But I think it's really tough.
Stop watching Married at First Sight. Pick up a book instead. And now I wish everybody could see your face right now, Memby. I'm just going to describe Mem has just looked at me with such disdain when I mentioned that. All right, Mem, this has just been, I wish we could talk for 2 or 3 hours. There's so much more I want to ask you. There's so much more that we could talk about, but our time is really, really at an end. So to finish every podcast in this Parenting in Perspective series, I ask 5 quick questions. Now, everyone gets the same ones. They're supposed to be relatively rapid fire, so we don't need to go too deep. Sure. And what I'm probably going to ask you about is, I'm going to ask you about your daughter, but in some cases, because she's now a mature woman of, let's just say she's more than 30 or 40, and she's got her own child and all that kind of thing. You may wish to substitute your grandson into some of these questions if you wish, but I will ask in relation to your daughter, okay?
Yeah.
So if we asked your daughter her favourite thing to do with you, what would she say?
She would say sitting on a couch, on the same couch as me, hanging out, just having time to be together, just hanging out. That is our favourite thing to do.
Yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be by the time they've moved out of home, fingers crossed. What's been your trickiest parenting moment?
Probably letting her go, the leaving home thing. Because she was so excited about leaving home. She was so excited about leaving us. Looking back, after it happened to us, I looked back on my own leaving of home. I had no concept of the grief that caused my parents. None whatsoever. I was literally flying out of Africa, off to London. It was amazing. I was so excited, and what they must have gone through must have been hell. And letting her go was, without saying, we're going to miss you, it's going to be terrible, we're going to set a place at the table by accident. We couldn't say any of that because we knew how excited she was. We couldn't say. we are going to be heartbroken. You are our only child and you're going to another country. How could you do this?
Yeah. I can really relate. My eldest daughter recently married, and I love the way that you use the word grief, because as thrilled as we are, we're so excited for the exciting adventure that she's on in her life. She's been married for 1.5 years now. But at that time, there was that letting go was a genuine grieving process. It was an obstacle and a challenge for us to overcome as a couple and as individuals in a way that we could never have anticipated.
My husband and I went to a hotel after we'd seen her off. We flew to Melbourne together. We saw her off on the international flight, and we cried all the way to the hotel in the taxi. And when we got to the hotel and checked in, my husband, who was, obviously, had been weeping, and I had been weeping, and he said, we've had a family tragedy. He didn't say that our daughter had left us. He just said we've had a family tragedy.
The poor people around you. Yeah.
It was terrible. Go on.
Mem, if you could spend an hour with your daughter at any age at all, let's say tomorrow afternoon, she walks into the living room at that age, what age would you pick and why?
Look, I'd pick now. I mean, I'd pick now. The older she is, the more of a parent that she becomes. She's just lovely. I would just like her as she is. As she is. I would not like her at 17.
I don't know too many parents that would ask for a 17-year-old again. And no matter how good life has been, Mem, and how glad you are to be in the moment, what are you most looking forward to, either as a mum or as a grandma?
I'm 74, and I've got a very bad asthma. I'm a very bad asthmatic, so I'm very, very frightened of the coronavirus, right? Terrified of it. But my great hope is that I live long enough to see what my grandson wants to do in life. There are so many choices that kids have now. Whatever. I just want to know which way he goes. It's because it's fascinating to see what the choices are. I mean, my daughter was a politician for 8 years. She was a journalist for 7 years. She's been a teacher on and off. She's a teacher again. It's just fascinating to watch people's development and their interests, and I just want to be there. I just want to live long enough for that.
Beautiful.
And I hope I will. I hope I will.
My last question for you, Mem, is this: if you could go back to Mem Fox as a young mum, probably having one of those tough moments with maybe that 17-year-old, or maybe with a 2-year-old, and you've such little experience as a parent, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, look, let it rip. I mean, seriously, you lose your block. Just lose it. Get over it, but lose it. There are two experiences in my life with my daughter that neither of us has ever forgotten. And we quite often bring it up in a sort of joking way. I hope it's joking. Where she had a mug with Chloe written on it, okay, and it was a precious mug. It had been made specifically for her. And in a fit of absolute rage about something, I've got no idea what it was, I threw it on the kitchen floor and it smashed into 1,000 pieces. And although that was terrible, it was absolutely tragic and it was completely wrong of me. I'm not saying it was right at all. The explosion of rage was over, and I was devastated, and that we made it up. But you can't hold it in all the time. You've got to be real. You have to be in a marriage. You've got to be real. You've got to say how you feel. Otherwise, it makes you rot inside. You just have to have these raising, rows, but then get over it. The forgiveness has got to be fast. The getting back to normal has got to be fast. You can't be resentful. You can't hold on to things that make you mad. You've got to let go of them. And the other time was, and I can't remember what it was, and she must have been a teenager, but certainly, and I'm so mortified to tell you this because it'll sound as if I'm the most awful mother in the world, but I did kick a hole in her bedroom door, because I think the door had probably been closed against me in a way that was,
you were trying to kick her, weren't you, Mem? You were trying to kick her and she put the door in the way and you put a hole in the door.
The door should not have been closed in the manner in which it had been closed. and that was enraging.
But we learn from these challenges, Mem, and I love the fact that you're not perfect and you're okay with that.
Perfect? Oh, God, no.
Well, I've never had anybody give advice that we should let it rip, but Mem, we've laughed. I've enjoyed your laughter. I've enjoyed your insights, and the conversation has just been so delightful. Thank you so very much. Best-selling author Mem Fox, and mother of one and grandma of one. Thanks so much for being so generous with your time.
Thank you. It's been lovely. Thank you.
I hope you've gotten some insight into Mem Fox as a result of this Parenting in Perspective podcast. Two things that I really found amazing were that a very short book can take up to 2 years to write, and that the best-selling and multi-award winning Mem Fox thinks that when she first puts pen to paper, it's mostly rubbish. That's reassuring because I usually feel the same way about what I write. Mind you, I haven't had nearly the success that she's had. Anyway, join me, Dr. Justin Coulson, next time as I talk with somebody that I've been dying to talk to for so long. Professor Sarah Coyne, who discovered just what playing with Barbies and watching Marvel movies does to our children. We're going to talk about the impact of the media on children and families.
We're just having the wrong conversations in society right now. So instead of just saying, screens are bad, decrease screen time and things will get better, they actually won't. We have to empower and educate our youth on how to use their screens in healthier ways.
That is Professor Sarah Coyne, my next guest on the Parenting in Perspective podcast. And just before we wrap this up, thank you so much to everyone who has jumped into Apple Podcasts and left a review and sort of said, hey, we listened to the podcast and we really love it. I wanted to just quickly point out this one that came through from Larissa Jade, who said, bite-sized parenting gems. I'm giving this one 5 stars. Larissa Jade said, Dr. Justin gives great advice, simple, easy to implement, and very effective. I never regret the time I spend listening to this podcast. So very much appreciate that. If you're enjoying this podcast, please keep those reviews coming. Jump onto Apple Podcasts and let everybody know what you think. It helps get the word out, and they're so important for helping people to discover the podcast and find out more about how to make their families flourish. Also, please just tell your friends about the podcast. You can actually share them from the app in which you listen, and I'm sure that there are plenty of people who would love to hear a podcast like the one that we've shared today. If you'd like more info on how I can help your family flourish, particularly if you'd like to have ongoing monthly support via our amazing Happy Families memberships, please visit happyfamilies.com.au. The family, you're part of it, is getting bigger and happier every day. Or visit my Facebook page, Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families. And as always, a big thank you to Justin Roiland for his work in producing the podcast and making it sound just fabulous. And thank you for listening to Parenting in Perspective. It's a Happy Families podcast.